Let's say this is efficient studying, but higher means more efficient, lower means low or no efficiency. And this axis, we're looking at time. But here's what happened. A study was done, I believe, at the University of Michigan. They asked students to do the following thing. When you're ready to study, you've got all your materials, you're back in your little dorm room or your place you live, check your watch, start working. The moment you feel that sense of, I've read it, but it's not coming through, note what time it is. Record that, bring it back. And they had many, many hundreds of freshmen and sophomores do this, and then somebody took the time to compile it. And typically, right about 25 to 30 minutes. But how long do we teach? 50 minutes. And yet, probably most of the learning, if it's going to happen, is in the first 25 to 30. A woman named Jeanette, I was a junior at Western, she was a freshman. She set the following goal: to study for 6 hours a night, non-stop, 6 to midnight. You want to guess her grade point? 0.0. She failed every class. And this is why telling people to study more does not necessarily help. What I want to do is show you graphically what I'm talking about. Let's say this is efficient studying, but higher means more efficient, lower means low or no efficiency. And this axis, we're looking at time. But here's what happened. By about 6:30, she was in a major slump. But what was her goal? To study 6 hours. So she continued to sit at her little desk and stare at pages until midnight. She was at her desk 6 hours. How long did she actually study? About 20, 30 minutes. What you need to do is what? Take a break. And here's what's cool about it. You can study for a half hour. It doesn't take a half hour break to recharge your batteries. For most people, about 5 minutes. And this is where you go away, do something fun for 5 minutes. Enjoy some music. Go back, and here's what happens. Your efficiency is nearly 100%. Study a half hour, take a break. Study a half hour, study a half hour. Let's say you've studied till midnight. What do you want to do after your last study? You want to give yourself a big treat, okay? Whenever your studying time is done, plan something special. I'll give you mine. This is politically incorrect. I liked beer. My goal was to knock out all my studying, go to the Iron Bull Tavern in Bellingham, knock down a couple beers for my treat. These yahoos started drinking in the afternoon, then went to the tavern, planning to go home and study. You know that's not going to happen, okay? The coolest part is this. Because you're now reinforcing it with those little breaks and something fun, you extend it. And you'll find you can go 30, 40, 50, an hour and a half. And this is training. Those of you who go on to advanced degrees, you're going to have to study incredible lengths of time without taking a break, because you've got to get it done. You're training yourself, and if you do it right, it becomes progressively easier. How many of you magic mark, highlight, whatever you call it, your textbooks? I'm reading for the most important things. Zip, zip, zip. And some of you get out rulers to make it really neat. Then you go back to the start of the chapter. You read the first thing you underlined and you go, oh, I remember that. No, you don't. You recognize it. People are incredible at confusing recognition with recollection. Your visual recognition threshold is so great, you can see a person once, see them years later and go, I know you. Were you a student at Pierce College? Yeah. Proof of this, grab a magazine in your house that you haven't looked at for a while. Leaf through it. You will get the illusion of remembering virtually every advertisement and article. But to prove that it's not recollection, it's actually recognition, before you turn to the next page, predict what's on it. No way you're going to be right. But as soon as you turn, you go, oh, I remember that. No, you don't. You recognize it. You now go back to study it, and you say, oh, I remember it. So do you study it? No. And then they come in the next day all ready for the quiz. Here's your quiz. I don't believe it. I can't remember a thing. How many of you have heard that? Those of you who teach, I could retire now if I had $1 for every one of those comments. You think you knew it, but in fact, you recognized it. You didn't know it. Now back to this active learning. How do you know it? If you can look at it, go to the next one, read it, and then stop and go back to the one before. Look up in the sky and in your own words, say what that was about. You will not forget it overnight unless you suffer a pretty major cerebral accident. It just doesn't happen. Most of you undo good studying by not sleeping adequately. Some of the latest work on REMing, we're not sure exactly how, but there's something going on. It involves the hippocampus. It involves the storage from a transitory long-term memory to a permanent, what we call consolidation. That just labels it, doesn't really say what's happening. But we're getting increasing evidence that consolidation process is dependent on rapid eye movement sleep, which if you're an adult happens about every hour and a half once you fall asleep. If you're not getting a good night, typically around 8 hours, you're not getting enough REM. What you've studied doesn't become permanent. And I can tell you there are studies that show simply by getting better rest, some students improve markedly in their performance because their brain now stores it a lot more efficiently. I'm going to give you a couple other tips here. Taking notes, so vital. But most students who do it haven't learned a very simple rule. The first moment you get after a class, ideally right after the class, you should sit down with your notes and expand on everything you jotted down. Give it depth, flesh it out, okay? If you even wait to go home and do it a couple hours later, you will have forgotten some of your own notes. Well, that's a wasted note. But if you take the moment right after class to flesh it out, you now have a little more detail. Odds are at night, you can still recollect it. That will be a powerful addition with only about a 5-minute time investment per class. That is a good trade-off, okay? Now, the next piece. How many of you know the best way to learn is to teach somebody else? Boy, if you've got family members or roommates, teach them. It's powerful because it reinforces your learning, plus it tells you if you really understood it. Because if mom or dad says, well, I don't quite get that, and you go, I don't understand it either, then very quickly you have to go back and redo it. Teaching another person. Now, some of you may not have anybody at home to teach. Teach an empty chair. If you have roommates or friends, say, I'm just doing this little Socratic thing where I'm going to explain it to an empty chair. I would also do it with my kids, teach them as best I could, my spouse, anybody who would listen. It's a nice way of learning. Active recitation. By the way, one piece of research said 80% of your study time is best spent reciting and only 20% reading. Okay? SQ3R. Survey, that's the S. Question, that's the Q. Then you have 3 R's. Read, recite, review. So, how do you do the survey? These are not novels, but this is a textbook. So what you do is you actually go through the entire chapter. You look at pictures. What's this about apples? What's this about a duck-billed platypus? Okay. And what you're doing is you survey, you ask questions. What are formal concepts? What's a superordinate concept? So you raise questions as you go through. It only takes a couple of minutes to survey a chapter. What you're doing then is causing you to be looking for answers. If you intend to find something, you find it. The reading followed by the recitation, I talked about that. Technically, before a test, it should be review. It should be in the barn. Now you're just touching up to make sure you haven't lost anything or confused anything. Okay. Use the book correctly, SQ3R. Okay, I got one last thing. You got to memorize facts. How do you do that? What you use, mnemonics. In my view, they're quicker, easier than rote memorization, and I do use them. How do you unscrew something? You turn it counterclockwise. So I tried to teach my son this. He says, "No, Dad, it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey." That's another saying. It's perfectly good. How many days in the calendar? 30 days. That's September, April, June, and November. We used to learn that. They don't do it anymore. You kids have learned knuckle counting. January, February, March, April, May. Little sayings can allow you to remember things very well. I've gone beyond my time. I know that she has to be out of here. I think there might be another class. I thank you so much. There's a handout up there.